Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello and welcome to the Self-insurers in Australia podcast. I'm Alorna Strong, a partner at Hall & Wilcox, and I lead our national insurance practice, and I'm delighted to be your host for this new season. In this series, we'll be talking about issues that matter most to self-insurers, things that come up in day-to-day claims management and how we can handle them more effectively. So whether you're joining us from the office or out for a walk or on your commute, thanks for being here. It's appreciated. Today, I'm joined by Andrew Stamp, who is a partner in our self-insurance team and practice in Victoria. Hi, Andrew.
G'day. Happy to be on this podcast with you.
Thank you. Today, Andrew and I will explore psychological injuries, what is compensable, and how to defend these types of claims. So this is our second podcast today, Andrew. I've spoke to Tim in respect of psychological injuries and how New South Wales may deal with those. So today I'm going to get the Victorian perspective from you, an expert in psychological injuries. So thanks again for joining us. I might just jump into the first scenario. So basically, Simon Taylor has been employed with Smart Utilities for over 18 months. Over the past 6 months, Simon's performance had declined significantly. Key issues included colleague complaints, customer complaints, missing some deadlines, and a poor attendance at work and also late arrivals. In response to this, Smart Utilities put into place an informal and then a formal performance review. Firstly, Simon was issued with a verbal warning, followed by a written warning when there was no improvement. The process has taken some time as Simon has been on and off work and has refused to attend some of the meetings. In October 2025, Simon lodged a workers' compensation claim alleging bullying and harassment by his direct supervisor and team leader. The claim included allegations of being singled out and micromanaged, as well as being unfairly treated. So attached to the claim was a medical certificate from the GP stating that Simon was suffering from an injury of stress due to being bullied and harassed, and he is currently unfit for work. So Andrew, my first question to you is stress an injury, and what does Simon have to prove in order for him to have a compensable psychological injury claim?
Well, when he said that's your first question, that's actually two questions.
I love it. I love doing two questions. Maybe just cover off on is stress an injury, because this is something I often get asked by clients.
Yeah, once upon a time it may have been considered by some people as an injury, but effective 31 March 2024, we had some scheme modernisation provisions come into effect in Victoria, which made it very clear that stress is not an injury. Stress might give rise to an injury, but as of itself, it's not. So in this example you've given, where the medical certificate just says stress, and assuming that claim form that Simon's completed also says stress, this problem hasn't ticked the first bar required to have a compensable claim in Vic, being a diagnosable mental injury.
Okay, and what are the other aspects that you would look at as well, Andrew, for an injury to be compensable? So assume it wasn't stress, assume it was a diagnosable psychological injury in accordance with the DSM. I think it's 5 currently. So say he ticked the box for the definition of a mental injury. What would be the next sort of bars that he would have to, or perhaps the next threshold he'd have to meet in order for the claim to be compensable?
First of all, I would just check out who provided that diagnosis. So you're right, it's got to be per DSM-5, but it's also got to be diagnosed by a medical practitioner or a psychiatrist. So sometimes I've seen claim forms completed by a psychologist in this instance, or for physical injury, it could be anybody else really, but for this type of injury, definitely got to be a GP or a psychiatrist.
Okay, so in this case, it was a GP, but okay, so to assume it was a an adjustment disorder, mixed anxiety and depression. Okay, what would be next?
The worker has also got to establish that condition causes a significant behavioural, cognitive or psychological dysfunction. Now, thirdly, and I think this is probably where the most heat in the fight, is that the condition arose predominantly out of the course of employment. Now, thankfully, predominant is given its plain, ordinary meaning. And I remember looking at this at the time of the second reading speech. That goes on to define it as meaning greater than the sum of all other contributing factors. So in this case here of something like, in our game, we generally see people suffering from a range of things in their life causing stress. It might be looking after elderly parents, sick children, financial pressures, marital. It's got so many things.
Absolutely.
So you want to add all those together and see whether the work cause is still bigger than all those other things in order for it to be compensable.
Okay, so touching on what you've just said there, Andrew, in terms of looking at other things in the worker's life and what may be going on in Simon's psyche and in his life, what sort of investigations then would you be recommending a self-insurer complete, or you'd be completing in order to work out that predominant cause or to see if he satisfies the threshold?
The gold standard is getting hold of clinical records.
Yep.
Now, the difficulty is that agents, self-insurers and so on, they have 28 days to get hold of this, and there's no compulsive mechanism to make treaters, if you can identify them, provide those records. But that is what they've got to be after. Failing that, hopefully, reports from the treating general practitioner, psychologist, psychiatrist, and the like. So that's the key thing on the diagnostic front, and then that can be provided to an IME to provide their opinion. Now, quite often, employers can't get hold of this material and they commission an IME report, and the IME doesn't get the full history. If the full history comes to light later on, then of course a supplementary report can be obtained. But by then, oftentimes, the initial claim decision will have been made.
Okay. So if we assume that Simon has met all of those thresholds, so the definition of, the diagnosable injury, meeting the predominant test, so all of those tick, 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 tick. In terms of smart utilities and stepping into their shoes, how can they defend this claim? Are there any defences under the legislation available to them in this scenario?
Yeah, there are. The one that sort of is screaming out here is whether there is a reasonable management action defence in the context of Simon's performance having declined, and I think he mentioned an informal and then a formal performance review. I'd imagine that there's a whole process put in place. Now, getting hold of all the material about that process is going to be really important if the employer is going to rely on it. Now, about that, you're going to have documents that already exist in the workplace. So anything that the written warning, or I think it's a written warning, I think you mentioned, that's got to be provided, but also all the documentation leading up to that. So documentation, organising any meetings to discuss his performance and the like. Hopefully that will include references to having support people and so on being able to attend with Simon. The data around the poor performance, I think, will be crucial as well. So it can be shown that it's not trivial, that it is important to the employer, and that the steps that they took were warranted. There is also a range of material which doesn't yet exist that should be created. That sounds a bit sinister, but it's not. What I mean is witness statements.
Oh, good. I'm glad that's what you were about to say.
Yeah. Particularly in circumstances in which there's performance management, you will want statements from the people conducting the performance management about how they did it. Those statements may also be informed by any file notes and the like of meetings, and hopefully those file notes and the rest are documents that will be obtained as well. Now, in this one, you mentioned that Simon had also in his claim form complained of bullying and harassment. Now,
yes.
That's not uncommon when someone is subject to performance management, that those allegations get thrown up in claim forms.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that. I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So although it's not uncommon and although it frequently doesn't go anywhere, I think whoever's managing the claim on behalf of the employer does need to look into that.
Yeah.
It is possible that the workplace is toxic. It is possible that there is bullying and harassment. And in such situations, you want to know what co-workers would say about the culture there and the supervisor and the team leader that were involved.
Yeah.
If you're looking at rejecting a claim and you're looking at defending it all the way, best you know what's on the horizon for when you get to court.
Absolutely. I find that these sorts of defences really rely on what everybody said and what they're actually going to then present in court if you take it all that way. So it's very much about he said, she said, and then also having that documentary evidence to back up what is said in those statements. Okay, fabulous. Thanks, Andrew. I think we've covered that scenario off really well. I might head on to the next scenario. So scenario 2 that I wanted to take you through was Monica Bing is a 34-year-old administrative officer. She's been with Friends Incorporated for nearly 5 years and has consistently received positive performance reviews. Her direct manager, Chandler, has overseen Monica's work for the past 3 months. Monica began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with Chandler's behaviour, which included compliments on her physical appearance, as well as unwelcomed physical contact, such as placing a hand on her back or shoulder during conversations. Outside of work, text messages late at night, including compliments and questions about her personal life, and unsolicited social media interactions, including liking old photos and sending private messages, have been undertaken by Chandler and have made Monica feel surveilled. Monica then lodges a workers' compensation claim alleging sexual harassment and harassment against her manager, Chandler. Monica is also diagnosed to suffer from an adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depression. So, Andrew, my first question in this scenario is, does it make a difference if some of the alleged inappropriate conduct occurs outside of work hours as well as during work hours? I'd really just like to dissect the difference between those two.
Yeah, it does matter, but maybe not to the extent that a lot of people would think. There's been a range of decisions over the years in which quite extreme situations well outside of employment hours and what you think is the employment context have been seen to be compensable. And you'd be well aware of sightseeing cases on non-work days, things like that. Now, the cases in which those situations have been compensable, there's always been quite a strong nexus with employment. So it might be that the sightseeing trip was arranged and supported by the employer, or the Christmas function was arranged or attendance encouraged by the employer, that type of thing. Here, it doesn't seem to be any, I'm just going to speculate, the employer's not going to be encouraging their staff to be romantically pursuing each other outside of work hours. So there's none of that sort of nexus there. But if some of the conduct is taking place in the workplace, then that's going to be a problem for the employer. I'd also hazard a view that the bringing together of these two people through the work context could be an avenue that might see the worker succeed in establishing the necessary nexus. If they were never going to be crossing paths outside of work and they're crossing paths and ongoing relationship during work hours in the office has continued, then the intermingling of it all probably makes this quite a bit messier than those situations I spoke about at the start, the sightseeing tour, the Christmas function, that type of thing.
So it's often always a case-by-case basis, isn't it? And the factual matrix in this one is
Correct.
a bit complicated. It might depend on the evidence given and how much behaviour actually took place
Yeah,
outside and inside
I think,
employment. But yeah,
yeah,
I think,
that's got to be right.
yeah,
And coming back to this concept of predominant cause, if when the history has been given to doctors that, gee, it was when my boss put his hand on my shoulder at the photocopier
yeah.
that was really the cause of all of this. If that's what she says, then yeah, sure, there's a mix, there's a context, but that's going to be quite compelling in her application in terms of establishing a predominant cause.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. And I suppose I think really what you're saying is it's that connection. So for that her employment, they would have never crossed paths or never had any sort of connection. So this injury or factual matrix that's being alleged would have never have taken place, and therefore she
Yeah,
would never have sustained the
yeah,
adjustment disorder. Yep.
that's
Okay.
right. It's far from cut and dry, this
Yeah, of
situation.
course,
You
of
could imagine
course.
an employer contesting this, and there are ways in which it could be
Yeah.
successfully defended. Equally, there are ways in which the worker could successfully prosecute this claim.
Yep, I agree with that. So, in terms of this scenario, Andrew, what if once we interview Chandler, say during the investigation of it, and Friends Incorporated arranges the circumstances investigation, gets a statement from Chandler, and Chandler goes, "Yep, yeah, definitely. I did touch Monica at the photocopier, or I did place my hand on her back or her shoulder when I was engaging with her in conversations. That's just the way I am. I was just trying to make Monica feel welcomed under working for me because she'd been at Friends for a while, but now was working under me. But I didn't think." Chandler basically says he didn't think that there was any sexual undertone or any suggestion of any sexual connotations. Would that change things? Does that make it worse, better? What would happen in that scenario?
Firstly, I think Friends Limited has got to do some retraining of their managers. uh, but it ultimately doesn't change anything in that it doesn't matter what his intentions were in his
Yep.
actions, as long as they took place as alleged by Monica. When it comes to perception, it's only actually Monica's perception that matters, how she interpreted these events.
Okay, so are you saying that as long as something has taken place, so it's not something that Monica has made up, so as long as
Yep,
it's a verifiable fact,
yep,
for want of a better word, that he touched her, then her perception of that or how that made her feel, regardless of Chandler's intentions, is
exactly, yeah,
enough.
exactly right. The adage "perception is reality"
Yep.
comes into play in this situation.
Okay. All right. And just to twist the facts again, because I love twisting facts and diving
Yeah,
deeper
yeah.
into these scenarios. So,
I'm interested to see where this is going, but yet to see.
so what if Monica and Chandler were actually in a relationship and it was a mutual relationship and then it ended, and then shortly after the relationship ending is when Monica lodged that claim for compensation. What would you say in that scenario, or if that's what came out in the sort of following the circumstances investigation?
Yeah, so I presume then that Chandler, are we going to assume Chandler is still saying, yeah, I did all these things, but
Yeah,
they were in the context of we're in a relationship at the time?
yeah, yeah. Let's go with that.
Yeah, I think it's a problem. Monica's prospects of success here, although so much is driven by what she tells doctors, if that history is right and it can be proven, then the bona fides and her intentions in bringing that claim have got to be put in issue.
Yep.
Now, it's going to take a long time before you can actually do that, because ultimately the only way to put a story like that in issue is
Mm.
via cross-examination. But it does seem to be quite the twist.
Yeah, so it would really be important, I suppose, to get good factual statements and have a good factual matrix, so you can point to the fact that this was a romantic relationship, which then takes it really outside of the bounds of employment almost if she's lodging her claim because she's disgruntled that Fla broke up with her, the relationship had ended poorly.
Yeah, correct. And you can imagine all manner of forensic challenges that will be brought in defending such a claim, because you would expect that there won't be any prior complaints in clinical records of a psychological injury. It'll only be when she decides that she has an issue that she'll start attending and giving the arguably appropriate history to her treaters. But that's not to say that histories given to doctors aren't sometimes self-serving and can't be challenged. But it'd be a difficult fight. But similarly, it might be that Monica wouldn't be too interested in pursuing a claim either, ultimately.
Yeah, okay. So it would probably be quite an investigation that would need to be undertaken, a lot of statements of colleagues as well, and what everybody knew of their relationship and whatnot. So
yeah, exactly what they'd observed in the workplace would be very helpful.
All right. Excellent. Andrew, just wanted to thank you. That was great. Really good insights today. And I suspect that our listeners would have gotten a lot out of that. The area of psychological injury can be complicated because I think often the factual matrices that make up the mechanism of injury is not as straightforward as tripping over or lifting something in the workplace. So I just wanted to thank you for taking us through some of those concepts of predominant cause and perception and connection with work. I also just wanted to thank our audience again for tuning in for another session. If you've got any questions or want to chat more on anything that we haven't covered, please feel free to get in touch. You can find out more details at hallandwilcox.com.au or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you like today's episode, please rate, review or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again, Andrew, for catching up, and for all of our listeners, see you next time.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you, listeners.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.